Okay, everybody, it's a few minutes after the hour, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. I can see there's still people just now joining us, but to keep to our timelines, I want to get started now. Um, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar entitled, Oh My Gosh, You've Got a Million Secure Shell Keys. This is lessons learned for managing the largest secure shell key management project in the world. Uh, my name is Jason Thompson. I'm the Director of Global Marketing for SSH Communications Security, and I'm here today with Joe Scaff, and he's the Director of Global Technical Services. He's actually the person who was on site in charge of the project and is very well versed in the ins and out of doing a major key management project in a global multinational organization. I'm sure, as many of you know, I recognize some of the names on the webinar today. We've met up at some point before, but just for those of you who are new to our webinar series or new to the company, SSH Communications Security, a little bit about us. We're the inventors of the SSH protocol. We're a NASDAQ-listed company on the Helsinki exchange. Ticker symbol is SSH1B. We have 3,000 customers, including 6 of the 10 largest U.S. banks. And what do we do? Well, we not only invented the SSH protocol today, we supplied many of the major financial institutions, retail organizations, and others with client and server data encryption or data and transit encryption technology. And beginning in September of 2011, we introduced our identity and access management solutions, including our Universal SSH Key Manager and Crypto Auditor, which provides key management capabilities and privileged identity management capabilities, respectively. As a company, our goal is to become the market leader in developing advanced security solutions to meet your business security and compliance requirements in encrypted networks. And as the inventors of the protocol, we feel we're well positioned to both help our customers from both a product as well as a services standpoint. A little more detail on problems that we solve, specifically with access controls, which we'll be focusing on today. Our platform allows discovery of existing legacy keys so that you can know who has access to what. Enables you to lock down the environment so only the key manager can access the server. This gives you a lot of controls and capabilities that most organizations right now don't have, as well as being able to secure the environment. We enable continuous monitoring of the environment, and we automate the rotation of keys to reduce the likelihood that you are compromised or can be compromised. In privileged identity management, we enable you to control what identities can do while operating inside your environment, including where each key can be used from and what commands can be executed using the key. We monitor the environment or the encrypted traffic to ensure that privileged identities aren't stealing data or violating policy. And at the network level, we control what identities can do within authorized servers and prevent workarounds that allow IT administrators to bypass firewalls, a very common issue in most organizations. And then for audit and forensics teams, we store a complete history of privileged user activities and traffic in a secure vault. And we also enable the layered security solutions such as SIEM and DLP to extend these capabilities into your secure shell environment. And just recently, we also announced that capability into SSL and FTPS. So there's kind of the overview. In addition, here's some customers that we have, obviously some well-known names. With 3,000 customers, this is just a small snapshot of our overall customer base and the industries that we actually operate in. So let's get to why we're here. Everyone wants to hear today from Joe. Thank you for coming today, Joe.
Thank you for having me, Jason.
Sure. And Joe, as I said, runs our global technical services team. So he's ultimately the guy in charge of running these major deployment projects and key remediation projects. Today, we're going to be focusing on a real-world case study, a top 5 global bank that has 1 million unmanaged secure shell keys. And let's give a little background into this, Joe. The problem was at a top 5 global bank, a security audit raised attention to the risk and compliance issues stemming from a lack of governance over the secure shell keys. So auditors, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, go in and they do some audit work and find that, well, what's going on? They're pushing.
So one of the main points that the audit point that was found was around the connections from development environment into their production environment, which and it was actually to the point where there was invalid data getting pushed into the production environment, with the possibility of corruption and causing outages in order to fix that. So it started off, as you mentioned, in Singapore, in their APAC area, and it trickled into a larger global project, which, as you mentioned, it encompassed thousands of servers and millions of keys.
So for a lot of folks that are on the webinar today, they're major financial institutions. They are not necessarily covered by Monetary Authority of Singapore, but this is a similar type of audit control and requirement as SOX and some other
right. Yeah. So
well.
I should have been clear. I mean, it started off as you mentioned as that, but then it trickled into the SOX and other compliance issues that they needed to solve from an audit standpoint.
In fact, you've got an issue where you've got federal banking regulators that are also involved because they are concerned about the access control.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, this goes to a federal level in the U.S. and certain requirements that they need to meet in certain time periods in order to remediate the issue.
Yeah, because of the size and scope of a lot of these key management challenges, they represent somewhat of an existential threat to the organization. Is that a true statement? If one were to compromise a root level key or a high privileged key?
Yeah, I mean, I can't give away all the details, but I mean, certainly there's risks involved in certain situations. There is very high risk in that if a root level key is compromised, it could provide access, not maybe directly, but through transit of trust throughout the environment, causing access to many servers within the environment, including some PCI and high security systems as well.
So I think in this case, the bank thought they had something that looked like this, right? This is one of the main issues they had was between testing and production servers, keys getting pushed with the image across to the production environment. They thought they had this before the audit, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. I mean, they certainly thought they had something close to that.
and what they really had amounted. This is a simplified graph because I know we did some really detailed analysis of the trust relationships, but they basically had keys that were basically everywhere around the environment, mixing up sort of segregation of duties and sort of violating that principle as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like you said, it's a bit simplistic in the diagram, but as they had production machines connecting to test connecting to production, developers connecting into production, any variation of scenario that you could determine would have been there.
So the environment that we discovered for them, and also the environment they had in place, the problem here was across 10,000 hosts, 20,000 plus SSH user accounts. We actually found 1.5 million keys thereabouts, and about 10% or 150,000 keys were unknown and had a high level of privilege, unknown as to why they were in place or who actually was being assigned to them. So inside of an environment like this, this particular bank has been using OpenSSH for 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
So basically the key management issue was one that was just piling on and they had no idea.
Yeah, I mean, we found 12-year-old keys that never been rotated in their environment.
And what do those keys provide access to? What kind of systems?
Pretty much any system that you can imagine. I mean, the first phase of the project was actually the most critical servers within the bank itself. So if you can imagine your PCI environments, your control environments, anything that would have highly secure data, and those keys, although some, there's obviously legitimate access, but there was access, like I mentioned, a 12-year-old key, or well, more than one 12-year-old key, but certainly that access has been there for a long time, and whether that private key was compromised along the way, the bank had no way of knowing that.
Which, of course, this sort of creates challenges across almost every compliance area, internal security controls, best practices. In addition to that, I think one of the interesting things, too, is that the secure shell identities make up one of the most authenticated identities in the environment, such as logins. And that's due to something that people don't think about, which is the number of machine-to-machine or application-to-application authentication and logins in the environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's true in this scenario, but I mean, you'll see in a lot of customers that they do some management around interactive user accounts, but you don't see a whole lot of administration and controls built around the machine to machine, the application to application um, connections, and especially in those very very often you utilize keys just because of the ability to not require a non-interactive connection to do the processing or file transfers.
So I think that's interesting because we see a lot of the same type of issue where someone's thinking, well, I think I've got my privilege administrators under control. Isn't that enough? I got this privilege access management solution that we just bought. Isn't that solving my problem? And realistically, what you're finding is that no, because the privilege access management solutions are very human-centric oriented. Is that true? Is that the
Yeah,
case?
yeah, exactly. As I mentioned, the interactive connections are seen if you're doing a password authentication, a jump post or
Yeah.
something. But there's ways around that, especially using keys and things, and that's why it's so critical to manage those, not just from an interactive standpoint, the keys that are being used from interactive users, but the all the way to the 50-foot level where you're managing the application keys because those can be compromised just as easily as
Yep.
the interactive user account and keys as well.
And so in this particular environment as well, they had in place a privilege access management solution or a gateway or jump host.
That's correct. Yes.
So they're thinking to themselves, well, we're covered.
Yeah.
When in reality, well, there's two problems. One is they weren't covering the machine to machine, but two, talk a little bit about some of the back doors that can be created by using a jump host system where keys can still be uh, deployed without central control.
Right. So it's one thing to audit the interactive connections, but if you're not auditing what they're doing specifically on a complete basis, you can certainly utilize the keys that are or utilize that access to place keys inside those destination hosts in order to in basic terms create a backdoor from whether it's your workstation, your laptop, or even another development or a machine, which is appeared to be the case in this scenario.
So malicious insiders, advanced persistent threats, these types of very advanced multi-stage attacks, they can definitely bypass your privilege access management solutions or other solutions you have in place to run against this in your view.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's certainly ways to do that.
So you've been working not just with this particular customer, but with many other customers out in the field with your team and doing initial discovery, showing the size and scope of the issue, bringing these issues up to the level of senior management. Is this bank's secure shell access control problems unique, or is this something that you see as being more widespread?
I mean, it's certainly something widespread. I mean, each customer or each scenario that we've come across has their own unique um, problems, and but they all still have the same fundamental issue in that they don't have proper controls or monitoring around their key usage and the keys that are deployed within their environment.
So what caused this particular project inside the bank to actually move up to a top tier project? Whereas I know a lot of folks that are still in the process of doing due diligence and going through and doing some discovery. What was the trigger in your mind that caused us to be like, wow, we have to get this done now? Because this was something that was put as a priority project, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the top 20 projects in the bank. It basically stemmed around compliance and audit findings that there was this in some ways security hole and the potential of huge loss of financial loss or data in general if this wasn't taken care of.
Mm-hmm. So I think we recently did a report with Forrester, which kind of highlights some of the issues around SSH, secure shell, key management, access controls, and give you a kind of a broader view that this is something I think, while we're showing you a case study today, it's something that organizations across multiple industries uh, recognize to some degree that they have, but this is also oftentimes being missed at the C level. And it's really an important issue, such as this being in a top 20 project for a major top 5 financial institution. That's a pretty big jump from being something that's completely off the radar. If we look, I've taken some data points here from Forrester, and this report's available on our website at ssh.com. And they were just asking some basic questions. How important is a secure shell to your organization? And we can see that 68% consider SSH as important or critical to their business. And I know when you're talking about the case study, for instance, here, you're talking about tens of thousands of logins, authentication, bash file transfers, move of credit card data, billions of dollars of transactions are moving across this particular financial institution. Um, this is something that the organization definitely sees as a critical piece of their infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean it's I mean we've heard some customers refer to SSH as the plumbing layer. It's basically what's moving data in and out of the organization within the organization. It's vitally critical for almost all aspects of inside of any large financial institution.
So if we look at this critical plumbing layer and we look at that it's been out there for a long time, and now we're starting to see these access controls and the ability of especially the risk of encryption being used against you because it blinds your security ops and forensics teams. Here's some questions that Forrester asked the group of respondents. What safeguards do you have in place today to prevent unauthorized use of secure shell keys? And you can see here pretty much about half are saying they have some type of control over, or they regularly scan and audit their IT systems to make sure there are no unauthorized keys. 52% say they implement some kind of key usage restrictions. 51% say they monitor secure shell authorizations or connections. Half say we regularly review logs of secure shell connections. 50% say we delete user keys when an employee or contractor leaves the organization. And all privileged users have to log in through a gateway or jump host at 44%. So you're seeing sort of a picture here where organizations have components of this or think they have components of visibility and control, but clearly half saying that we don't have any. Do you think the half that is saying that they have some kind of visibility is thinking of this from the standpoint of the more traditional privilege access management points of view? Or
Yeah, I think the key point you said there was that they think that they have controls over it, because what we've seen, not just in this particular scenario, but as you mentioned, some of the other organizations that we've gone into, that they once we've done a discovery of their environment, of the keys that they have within their environment, they realize that they really didn't have the controls over the environment that they thought they did, especially from a key standpoint. Um, Implementing key usage restrictions, it's a very small percentage of most environments that I've seen. It's something that's critical to kind of locking down the usage of a key and things of that sort, which I think we'll discuss a little bit later. Deletion of user keys when employee leaves. I've seen deletion of accounts, but if those keys stay out there in some environments, they might see that as a complete solution, but the keys are still sitting out there on hard drives and able to be accessed by system administrators or privileged access users that can use those in other ways.
So a lot of times people think they've deleted the account, therefore they've solved the problem, but really the mechanism to actually remove the access is still sitting right there. So it's a lot of things being missed in the space. This kind of plays into the sort of challenge here when you've got a plumbing layer type solution that's largely lived in the domain of the system administrators who've been deploying these keys, and it's been done at a very low level in the organization, and senior management hasn't had a lot of visibility. What we find from the Forrester study is that most people say that secure shell is a shared responsibility amongst a lot of different individuals in the organization. In your view, is that kind of what you've come into place too? There's no like sort of centralized, standardized approach to this, some being better than others, of course, in doing this.
Yeah, exactly. Some companies are better at kind of centralizing this a bit more, but it really is widespread. I mean, in the scenario that we're discussing now, it was until we came in and started to kind of, in some ways, lock down their environment from a key standpoint. Any of the application users could log in and create new authorizations, and that again is kind of tied to the same issue that we were discussing before. Once you can start creating those authorizations, you can create these back doors in a way where you're not going through a jump host or any type of tracking mechanism. So you therefore can get onto the system and make, do changes to the system without it being logged, or well, the system log would still be incorporated, but that's an after effect kind of scenario where the damage is already done at that point.
Right. So we've talked a little bit about this, and here's kind of a graphic to kind of follow this up. We've talked about some of the challenges that are out there. The the 20% of interactive human users that are just sort of the tip of the iceberg, folks think they have pretty good controls over those. They're missing the 80%. And here we've already talked a little bit about the details in the bullets here. But I want to jump one more slide ahead to show uh, some of the major incidents and threats that have surrounded or where SSH keys or SSH access controls has been a target. One of the ones that was most highly publicized was the Coretta or the Mask, which was an extremely sophisticated, advanced, persistent threat that was out there for about 7 years, and amongst other things, it was targeting SSH keys. So if you're looking at an environment where SSH keys are uncontrolled, you've got 1.5 million. How many keys do they realistically probably need in an environment with 20,000 hosts? Definitely not 1.5 million.
No, I mean, certainly, I mean, we saw in the number of actual authorizations is quite larger than, because we actually found instances where the private keys were shared. So that essentially doubles or triples the amount of authorizations you have, which is even more scary in some ways. But as you mentioned, the mask or the Coretta thing, um, certainly it opens up the door for an advanced persistent threat, especially from a programmatic standpoint, that can go in and identify or scan for these keys and utilize them for whatever purpose that the developer wants to, and or a system administrator that maybe I don't see it here, but we've done. There's been other instances that we've discussed on some of these webinars where a system administrator finds out he's going to leave the company and deploys the keys and does something similar to what the mask does in some ways.
And gives himself perpetual access for that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the fact that something like this is out there for 7 years, I mean, think of it from a remediation standpoint. If someone were to have been compromised by the mask, they would have to then go through and rotate their 1.5 million keys.
Essentially, it's the only safe way to
right.
kind of remediate that issue.
And this kind of ties into some of the challenges with Heartbleed as well. Like folks had to go back out there and rotate their certificates and their keys.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in this case, if there were something to occur like Coretta found in someone's environment, they would have to go through and rotate this. That would take how many hundreds of man hours, and it potentially leaves an ongoing, at least vulnerability, if not open attack on the organization, because you don't know which keys are being compromised, what they do.
Right. Yeah. I mean exactly right. I mean, you're not sure which keys are put out there by a tool like the Mask or any system administrator that's gone rogue. But if it's been active for 7 years, you basically have to assume that it's been compromised. The machine in the environment's been compromised, same as you mentioned the Heartbleed. So the rotation of those keys you first have to identify it. You have to discover all the authorizations that are available. You have to monitor those keys for usage, ensure that the application owners know what their keys are being used for, and in order to be able to rotate or clean out those keys effectively without causing an outage within the environment.
And then in 2013, there's other instances of events or viruses that have targeted, or malware that's targeted secure shell. But we've seen in 2013 another one called Focator, which wasn't as highly publicized, but also specifically targeted the Linux operating system and is capable of stealing login credentials from secure shell connections. Another point too is the insider threat. So we talk about Edward Snowden. We don't know. They know he used fabricated keys. We don't know if it was secure shell keys or not. It might take some time before the NSA actually tells us exactly what happened there, and if we can believe them. And in April of 2013, there was also an instance of a HostGator employee, like you said, who had deployed a key and had access to the entire organization's servers, which hosts many, many hundreds of websites. The insider threat from being able to grab hold of these keys and use them to compromise data, and then using the encryption tunnels to then exfiltrate that data. Does that really pose a clear and present danger to organizations if they have within their midst a malicious insider?
Well, of course, and I mean you want to be able to, first off, as we've been mentioning, know where somebody has authorization and limit that authorization only to the servers that they need. The only way you can do that is if you find out what's out there now, and not only that, you want to be able to limit the access for those keys that are being used, so that if a key is compromised, it's limited to the environment, that it can't go across the whole organization, as you discussed, as you mentioned with the HostGator scenario,
Mhm.
where you got access to all the servers, or a large number of the servers within the environment.
And compliance standards. So we talked a little bit about Monetary Authority of Singapore, PCI environments, SOX environments. Um, PCI specifically has now updated PCI version 3 to say, hey, you've now got to audit for this. And there's audit tools out there. We have an auditor's tool, it's SRA, that you can actually download from our website. But auditors are using this tool now to go in and pull out data, find how many keys you've got in the environment, the overall health of the environment. But we're seeing compliance mandates now coming into play. Um, More specifically than before. Do you see this as being a major, the buying, or the customers out there? Are they approaching this from a compliance standpoint? Are the auditors giving them findings? I know we've had a couple instances where we're in discovery with organizations because they've got dinged by auditors saying you have to fix this. In other cases, it's security side that's saying, hey, this is a major problem. How do you see that kind of split occurring?
Well, I mean, there's a pretty good split. I mean, we do see, like you said, a lot on compliance, a lot on PCI certainly, and there are, of course, systems that want to get ahead of the game. They know that they're going to need to be doing this. That the PCI mandates are more focused on um, not necessarily keys necessarily, but authorizations in general, which tie to the keys, and the rotation of those keys, for instance, is one. The ability to do that just as you would a password, but there are some direct links into the keys themselves, and whatnot. I'm not sure if we want to go through the details here, but
Right.
it's certainly the split between compliance and compliance and audit is where we see most of our focus, and them coming to us with knowing that they have this issue,
Yep.
and asking us what we can do to help.
Well, we have specific compliance sections on the website, such as the PCI cheat sheet, some other things, some brief documents folks can go to kind of see how they measure up, or some of the risks from a compliance standpoint. So we don't have to go into detail on that because I know we want to cover the best practices before the time is up here today. And just as a aside, I guess, to look at how much visibility this is getting out there in the space, and these are just some of the major industry rags and other news outlets and media outlets that have covered specifically secure shell access control issues over the past year and a half or so, since we've been pretty active out there in the space. It is a known issue. It's a known problem, and it's something that deserves greater awareness than probably it's getting inside many organizations. But many organizations are also now starting to realize that, hey, yeah, this is a major component of identity and access management, and it's an area that's specialized but is highly important to their business continuity and security of the organization. So let's look a little bit at how we solve the problem. In the case of the top 5 bank that we've been discussing, we didn't approach. Not everyone takes the same approach either, but in this particular case, uh, we provided professional services, and our expertise as part of managing the project, as well as deployment of the product. And for this particular customer, that resulted in the solution. What, from a professional services standpoint, what are some value adds that your team or SSH Communication Security, as the inventors of the protocol, uh, what are some value adds that they bring that organizations like this particular customer really relied on in order to get this project up and running?
Well, I mean, I think number one, or maybe not number one, but at least one of the critical ones is experience. I mean, where we've been in the space, our CEO is the original inventor of the protocol. We know what the security risks are around, secure SSH, or security in general around the pipeline, the plumbing layer that we've been discussing. So we certainly bring that expertise to the table. We utilize our products in a way that allow us to speed the process of the remediation along with our professional services offering. Um, I mean, all in all, I mean, basically the product and the professional services kind of allows the customer to, or us to take that weight off the customer in a way that allows them to remediate their keys in a quicker, more efficient way.
Now, I was actually doing an hour-long briefing with one of the key analysts at Gartner for this particular type of issue, which name's Eric Height. Which I would encourage folks if they have a Gartner consulting agreement to contact him. He's very well aware of these issues. One of the things that he was really focusing on with us was that, and has been focusing with his clients that call him, is folks don't understand the power of SSH and also the many different things that it can do, but also how diverse it can be set up in the environment. And these complexities really require some experience to understand that one data center and another data center are not the same necessarily. One application and the next application are not the same. And especially over time, because it hasn't been managed, business continuity is a big issue there. You need to have the experience to go through and actually do the proper remediation steps to make sure that you don't break critical business processes. Is that
Right. Yeah. I mean, so because we've done these types of projects before, and we have a process in place. I actually skipped ahead on the slide, whatever I was reading, and it looks like we're going to discuss the process in a little bit. But certainly that experience and that helps us to kind of come to a large company like this top five bank and put these processes in place to be able to lock down their systems and clean them out in an effective way.
so? 85% of all secure transactions were critical application to application data transfers, and in this particular project, you had to go through application by application, remediate all of those keys, one-to-many relationships, one-to-one, clean them up, lock down the environment. We'll get into those steps in a second, all without causing an outage. And I think that's uh, one major benefit of bringing in experts that have done this before, because once you've gone through this process a few times, and we've done more than one deployment, obviously, and not all deployment some deployments we've had a Washington Post, which is a named customer. Um, they were able to get their deployment up and running very quickly because they had a smaller environment, but a slightly different set of requirements uh, in their environment, but clearly not 1.5 million keys and multiple applications running in their environment. So if we look at the product itself, so we talk a little bit about the solution, and we look at the product Universal SSH Key Manager. It enables organizations to discover, monitor, remediate, and manage. So we have to kind of go into like each section and briefly just talk to each one. Uh, what does it mean to go in and do a discovery project? How do you go about that?
So this discovery is really important because you want to start building those authorizations, the web of authorizations that you can identify. You need to be able to identify what servers are connecting to which ones, whether you have those policy violations going on, like a development machine connecting to a production machine, those kinds of things. Um, the, the the discovery also allows you to look at your configurations as well from a product standpoint, and allows you to see if your configurations are standardized or set up in a way that is to the best security for the environment that you have.
From the standpoint of monitoring.
Yeah. And then I can step through the other ones as well. So the monitoring is actually critically important because if you have one of the things that you'll find whenever you do a discovery is that you have some authorizations that have unknown private keys, meaning those private keys aren't able to be found, which they could be legitimate configurations set up, and that's why the monitoring comes in. You need to continue to both monitor the key usage of your environment in order to determine whether those authorizations are coming from servers outside of your currently discovered environment within the Universal Key Manager. But also you want to continue to monitor um, to make sure that there's not new authorizations being created or updates to configuration files that are again violating the policies that have been put in place by the customer.
And then remediation is the process of
right. Yeah.
This.
So once you've done your monitoring, the remediation is a process of actually cleaning out any keys that have been identified either out of policy or no longer being used.
And then bringing into management is kind of the ultimate. Now
Management, you've reached nirvana at that point. So you're to the point where you have a clean slate for the most part, and you want to keep it that way. So um, you can do things like integration in with existing tools, and but you can also continue to do ongoing management, reduce your operating costs, centralized management of keys, no setup or very little setup cost. Whereas doing key management or doing key creation and whatnot from an operation standpoint can be very costly.
So let's go over sort of our lessons learned, which sort of comes into our 6 must-have components of secure key management. Um, one major component being automated discovery of all trust relationships. We talked about a little bit about discovery. This includes all user keys that are authorized for login, authorized keys, and all private keys. And this has to be done on all servers and desktops in order to be effective. So that's one key or one major component. Lockdown and policy enforcement, as you talked about in the process, to be able to lock down the environment so that other administrators can't come in, deploy keys on their own, thereby recreating the problem. And I think this is something that a lot of customers think that, well, we can use some other type of server management solution to come in and just rotate the keys out. Or we'll go through a project on our own and kind of like pick and choose here and there, we'll go fix this. But from the second that you fix that server then again becomes it's not managed. It's not really under management at all. So then it immediately can become compromised with a key. So really being able to lock that down and also to enforce policy for all key operations is very important. With Universal SSH Key Manager, that essentially becomes the root owner, correct?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's essentially the root owner. But I mean, as we mentioned, you can integrate in once you get to that management stage of the mediation process. You can utilize. We have an API that you can utilize existing tools in order to ensure that you go through the proper approvals, even though there is an approval process within the key manager itself. But if you use your own tools, then we certainly can facilitate that.
And then, of course, once you get to the managed state, you can automate the key setups and removals through centralized key manager, as you said, through the APIs. This, of course, is going to eliminate all that manual work that's going on now inside organizations that do happen to do provisioning. They oftentimes don't do, as we saw from the Forrester Report, most organizations don't delete the keys. They might delete the user account, not the keys. But it eliminates that manual work. It ensures that you can remove the keys. This ties into Active Directory, correct? So you've got automation. You remove somebody, boom, it's going to remove it. Yep. So this is a great level of automation that it's bringing that most organizations don't have. And I know we did some economic analysis with some various enterprise customers, and on about a 15,000 host environment over the course of about 10 years, they were thinking it cost anywhere from like $10–15 million in staff time to be doing these provisioning of keys, and that's not including the rotational removal, just because, and that's just from the straight time standpoint. So there's a lot of costs that are being mitigated by the solution once it's up and running. That's correct. Is that correct?
Yep.
So rotating keys regularly, obviously this is a compliance requirement for PCI covered environments. Just like passwords, you've got to rotate these keys so that you can make sure that they're, they're not, the longer they're out there, the more risk they are of being compromised. So regular intervals for that. Controlling key commands, not only should you be able to control those access to what, you should also be able to control what identities can do while operating inside your environment. And that we cover a little bit there with our crypto auditor solution, which will be the topic of our next webinar, about adding additional layers of security in the network. But from a key management side, you can centrally control policy, you can centrally control configurations, and thereby restricting the number of possible commands that an operator can utilize while they're in the system.
Right, and tying back into the jump host or that scenario, I mean, there are some scenario or some software that work as a limiting factor in the controlling of keys. But again, that's from the standpoint of an interactive user. You still don't have that command line control in place for key users outside of that jump host, non-interactive users.
And obviously, at the end of the day, continuous monitoring. So we hear a lot about that when we talk about security intelligence products. We say, don't guess, you got to know. From the standpoint of continuous monitoring, we're going to continuously be scanning the environment when this is up and running to make sure that there's no unauthorized keys in the system. If so, we're going to plug this into your ticketing notification system. We can send you alerts or otherwise integrate this with the security intelligence solutions, correct?
Yeah, there's a huge number of alerts that you can set up as far as whether a configuration changes, a key gets added, all that kind of thing, and all of this can be fed to an external system as well using an API or whatnot.
And so, as we've got about 3 minutes left here, what are some of the misconceptions that you think companies going into a project where they've got to remediate SSH keys, what are some of the biggest misconceptions they have around that are?
I mean, I think the largest misconception is the number of keys or how big the problem actually is.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the way to go about doing it, I think, is another big misconception, and that's kind of where some of our expertise can come into play. We can coach companies through that and the best methods of figuring out what the keys are being used for. Again, with the monitoring and whatnot, to be able to allow for the safest way to remediation of keys without causing outages within the environment, which, as anyone in the financial industry knows, can cause significant losses of money and significant pain within the environment if there's any outages that are caused by removal of keys.
Right, definitely.
That are still being used.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, in kind of the process, first thing is to sort of understand the environment, know what's out there, know the level of risk that you currently have. And from there, that's the starting point. And the best way to do that, I think, is to work with an expert. We've done this for many organizations. I know your team's been active with pretty much the entire financial services sector of most major organizations out there because they so heavily utilize this. Would you say the first stop should be actually a conversation with someone who's done these types of projects before?
Oh, of course. I mean, the amount of information that you can get from one meeting with someone that has done this before is immensely useful and probably the best thing you can do just to kick off something like this.
Yep, definitely. So hopefully, I know we're down to the last minute here. Hopefully, we've answered some of your questions and raised some level of awareness from a compliance and security side, and hopefully Joe's been able to give you some insight into what he's experienced out there in the world of SSH key remediation, with ranging from SMBs all the way up to the largest companies in the world. We are sort of identified as the experts in this space, and I think that after doing several of these projects, learning a lot about the internals of how organizations have set up their systems and so forth, we provide a lot of extra value add into actually fixing this problem in a very very project-oriented, concise manner. Anyway, thanks a lot, everybody. It's 2:45, and I don't want to go over my time for the day. Thank you, Joe, for joining us today for our webinar. Oh my gosh, you've got 1 million secure shell keys, and this will be reposted online, so if you want to share it inside your organization, you can. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at jason.thompson@ssh.com. We can make available for you the PowerPoint slide deck as well, as well as answering any questions that you have. And I know Joe's available as well, so if you have any questions for him, feel free to just forward that on to me, and I will connect you guys up. Anyway, thank you all for joining us today, and have a great day.